He slept with my wife, so I became his best friend. The moment I read the messages detailing my wife's affair, I didn't feel anger. I felt a profound sense of clarity. My first move wasn't to hire a lawyer, but to invite her lover to dinner. Welcome back to the channel. My name is Frank, and this is my story. It's a story about time, about patience, and about how the same hands that can mend the most delicate broken things can also take them apart. If you've ever wondered what happens when a patient man runs out of patience, you're in the right place. Be sure to subscribe, because this is a story you'll want to see through to the end. I've spent my life restoring time, taking broken clocks, their gears stripped and their faces cracked, and patiently making them whole again. My workshop smells of lemon oil, old brass, and the faint, metallic scent of possibility. I've always believed that anything could be fixed with enough patience, with a steady hand and an eye for the true nature of the mechanism. My wife's affair taught me that some things aren't meant to be fixed. They're meant to be dismantled, gear by tiny gear. For 35 years, my life with Clara was a beautiful, reliable timepiece. A 19th century regulator clock, you might say. Not flashy, but precise, elegant, and comforting in its steady rhythm. We lived in a small, historic town in Massachusetts, in an old Victorian house that I had spent a decade bringing back to its former glory. Our life had a cadence. Coffee on the porch at 6 a.m., her with 2 sugars, me with none. The Saturday farmers market. The quiet evenings spent reading in the living room, the air filled with the gentle, synchronous ticking of a dozen clocks. I loved her. It's important you understand that. My love for her was like my work, quiet, meticulous, and absolute. It was in the heirloom roses I cultivated for her because she loved their scent, in the first edition books I hunted down for her collection, in the way I'd warm her side of the bed with a hot water bottle in the winter. It was a love built on 3 decades of shared moments, a mechanism so familiar I thought I knew its every movement, its every weakness. The first sign that a gear was slipping was almost imperceptible, a slight change in the rhythm. It was a Tuesday, about 6 months ago. Clara, who had always been a homebody, announced she was joining a book club. I was pleased for her. But the book club met at 8 p.m. on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and she would come home well after midnight, flushed and vibrant, smelling of wine and a perfume I didn't recognize. Then came the phone. Her constant companion. It was always angled away from me, and it would be silenced with a quick, nervous flick of her thumb whenever I entered a room. She, who had always been an open book, suddenly had chapters she was keeping to herself. These were small things, tiny anomalies in a system I knew intimately. When you spend your life listening for the faintest inconsistency in a clock's movement, you learn to notice when a human heart begins to beat to a different rhythm. I didn't want to believe it. For weeks I told myself I was being foolish. She was finding a new lease on life, I reasoned. She was 60, still beautiful, and deserved a little excitement. But the careful, patient man in me, the man who restores things, knew that you cannot fix a problem you refuse to acknowledge. The truth, like a cracked gear, must be examined in the light. The discovery wasn't dramatic. There was no private investigator, no screaming confrontation. It was quiet, mundane, and all the more devastating for it. I was restoring an old music box for a client, a beautiful, intricate piece that required a specific, rare type of solder. I knew I had a small amount left from a previous project, stored in a box of old electronic parts in the attic. While searching, I found her old tablet, the one she'd replaced a year ago but never got around to throwing out. I remembered it had a better quality speaker than my own, and I needed to listen to a reference recording of the music box's tune. I powered it on. The screen flickered to life, connecting to the house Wi-Fi. And then, the messages began to sync. A river of them, pouring in from the cloud. A conversation thread with a man named Julian. They were from months ago, but they were all there, a complete, detailed blueprint of her betrayal. I sat there, in the dusty, quiet attic, the smell of old wood and forgotten memories around me. And I read their plans to meet. I read their jokes, their flirtations. I read his praises of her beauty, her spirit, the passion he'd reawakened in her. And then, I read the things they said about me. "He's a good man, I know," she wrote in one message. "But it's like living in a museum. Everything is so quiet, so careful. I want to feel something loud, just once." Julian's reply was the one that stopped my heart. "He's old Father Time, darling. He lives in the past. Your future is with me." Old Father Time. I sat there for a long time, the tablet heavy in my lap. The man they described was a caricature, a two-dimensional sketch of the person I thought I was. Patient Frank. Predictable Frank. The steady, reliable clockmaker. They hadn't just betrayed our marriage. They had mocked the very essence of my being. The quiet dedication I had mistaken for love, she saw as a cage. A hot, white rage filled me, so intense it made my hands shake. I wanted to storm downstairs, to smash the tablet at her feet, to watch her perfect, composed world shatter. But then, another part of me took over. The craftsman, the restorer. You don't fix a delicate, complex machine with a hammer. You don't scream at a broken clock. You study it. You understand its mechanism, every wheel, every spring. You learn its weakness. And then, with calm, calculated precision, you either fix it or you take it apart completely. I walked back down from the attic, placed the tablet back where I found it, and went into my workshop. I closed the door, the scent of oil and brass a familiar comfort. The rage cooled, hardening into something else, something cold, patient, and sharp as a watchmaker's file. She would never know I knew. Not yet. I would continue to be patient Frank. Predictable Frank. I would make her coffee in the morning. I would tend her roses. I would warm her side of the bed at night. I would be the perfect, reliable husband. And while I was playing the part, I would be building a new mechanism. A clock of my own design. Not a clock that tells time, but one that counts it down. A clock of revenge, with every gear oiled, every spring tightened, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The first step was to learn everything I could about the man who had called me Old Father Time. My quiet, meticulous work had just begun. If you've ever felt the sting of betrayal, you know that the moments that follow are critical. Do you react, or do you plan? Let me know in the comments what you would have done in my situation. Your insights are always fascinating to me. My research into Julian Thorne was methodical. In a small town, information is currency, and I was a wealthy man in that regard. I didn't need to go digging through trash or hacking accounts. I just needed to listen. At the hardware store, at the post office, at the local diner. Julian was a real estate developer, a relative newcomer to our town, and he was making waves. He was charismatic, ambitious, and oozing the kind of confidence that comes from a life of easy wins. His crown jewel was a project called the Blackwood Mill. It was an old, derelict textile mill on the edge of town, a beautiful brick monolith that had been abandoned for 50 years. Julian planned to convert it into luxury loft apartments, a trendy blend of historic charm and modern convenience. It was the talk of the town. It was also a project mired in controversy. The Blackwood Mill was a protected historic landmark. To get his plans approved, Julian needed the blessing of the Town Historic Preservation Committee. And I, Frank Miller, the man who had single-handedly restored half the historic buildings on Main Street, the man everyone called when they needed an opinion on Victorian gingerbread trim or 18th century masonry, I was the committee's most respected unofficial advisor. My word carried more weight than the mayor's. Julian Thorne needed me. He just didn't know it yet. That was the moment my plan began to take shape, the first click of a gear falling into place. My revenge would not be a messy, emotional affair. It would not be an anonymous note or a public confrontation. It would be a work of art, a masterpiece of patience and precision. I would not destroy the man who was sleeping with my wife. I would befriend him. I engineered our first meeting with the care of a surgeon. I knew from the town gossip that Julian was a regular at the Oak Haven, the only upscale restaurant in town. I also knew he was struggling with sourcing authentic, period-appropriate windows for the mill. I happened to have a collection of antique trade catalogs from the very era the mill was built. I made a reservation for one on a Wednesday night, taking my catalogs with me under the guise of doing some light research. I saw him at the bar, nursing a whiskey, looking frustrated. I approached him, feigning surprise. "Mr. Thorne? Frank Miller. I don't believe we've been formally introduced." His eyes lit up with recognition. "Mr. Miller. Of course. The clockmaker. It's an honor." We shook hands. His grip was firm, his smile dazzling. He was every bit the charming rogue I had read about in Clara's messages. "I overheard you at the hardware store last week," I said, a small, harmless lie. "Something about the fenestration at the Blackwood Mill? I was just looking through some old architectural guides and thought you might find this interesting." I opened the catalog to a page of beautiful, arched factory windows. His eyes widened. It was the hook, and he took it. For the next hour, we talked. Not about our personal lives, but about his project, about mortise and tenon joints, about the challenges of repointing old brickwork, about the soul of a building. I played the part of the enthusiastic, knowledgeable old craftsman, and he played the part of the eager, respectful protege. It was a flawless performance on both our parts. By the end of the night, he was inviting me to tour the mill. "Frank," he said, already on a first-name basis, "your insight would be invaluable. You have to see what I'm trying to do." "I'd be delighted, Julian," I said, my voice calm, my heart a cold, steady metronome. The next few months were a masterclass in hypocrisy. I became Julian's confidant, his mentor. I spent hours at the mill, offering advice, pointing out details he'd missed, helping him craft a proposal that was both historically sensitive and commercially viable. I endorsed him publicly, singing his praises to the members of the Preservation Committee. I became his greatest ally. And all the while, he was still meeting my wife for their book club. The true torture, the centerpiece of my mechanism, was forcing them into the same room with me. I started inviting Julian over for dinner. "Clara, my dear," I'd say, "I've invited Julian Thorne for dinner on Friday, the developer from the mill project. He's a fascinating man. I think you'll like him." The first time the color drained from her face, the panic in her eyes was a fleeting, exquisite thing. But she couldn't refuse without raising suspicion, so she played her part, the gracious hostess. She would smile and laugh and pass the potatoes, all while avoiding his gaze. And I would sit at the head of the table, patient Frank, old Father Time, and watch them. I watched the secret, terrified glances they exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking. I watched the way Julian's hand would tremble slightly as he reached for his wine glass. I watched the way Clara's smile never quite reached her eyes. I was the director of their own private, agonizing play. I would praise Julian to her. "He's so driven, so full of life," I'd say, as we were getting ready for bed. "He reminds me of myself, 30 years ago." And I would feel her stiffen beside me in the dark. My workshop was my sanctuary, my war room. Night after night, I sat at my workbench, surrounded by the quiet ticking of my clocks, and I perfected my machine. My revenge had two main components. The first was the psychological torment, which was well underway. The second was the final devastating strike, the part that would bring it all crashing down. Using my extensive library and historical contacts, I began a deep dive into the history of the Blackwood Mill and the land it was built on. I spent weeks poring over old town records, property deeds, and forgotten church archives, and then I found it. A small, overlooked document from 1888, a deed of covenant between the original mill owner, Jedediah Blackwood, and the town. It stated that a small quarter-acre plot of the land, right where Julian was planning to build the luxury swimming pool and patio, had been a potter's field, an unmarked burial ground for the town's indigent and unnamed dead. The covenant stipulated that the land was to be left undisturbed in perpetuity for the peaceful repose of those forgotten souls. The document was obscure, forgotten, but legally binding. It would be a poison pill for the entire project. Excavation would have to stop. Archaeologists and state authorities would have to be called in. The delays, the legal costs, and the public relations nightmare would bankrupt Julian. He had leveraged everything he owned on this project. This single piece of paper would be his ruin. I made a pristine, notarized copy and placed it in my safe. The final gear of my clock was now in place. All I had to do was wait for the right time to let it strike. The day of the final vote from the Historic Preservation Committee arrived. Thanks to my vocal, unwavering support, Julian's proposal was expected to pass unanimously. His dream, the one built on lies and my wife's affection, was about to come true. He called me that morning, his voice electric with excitement. "Frank, I can't thank you enough. I couldn't have done this without you." "Nonsense, Julian," I said warmly. "You've earned it. In fact, Clara and I would like to have you over for a small celebratory dinner tonight. Just the three of us." He accepted, of course. He had no reason not to. That evening was the culmination of 6 months of patience. I cooked his favorite meal. I'd learned it from Clara, who had learned it from him. The irony was delicious. Clara was a nervous wreck, a tightly wound spring. Julian was triumphant, expansive, a man on top of the world. We ate. We drank the expensive champagne he brought. We talked about his bright future. I played my part to perfection. After dinner, I led them into my study. "Before we have dessert," I said, "there's one small thing I'd like to share with you both." I gestured for them to sit on the leather sofa. I remained standing, the quiet master of the room. "Julian," I began, my voice calm and even, "do you remember the first day we met? We talked about the soul of a building, about history, about authenticity." "Of course, Frank." "A great conversation," he said, smiling. "Good," I said. "I'd like to have another conversation about history, a more personal one." I looked from his face to Clara's. Her smile was gone. "This history begins on a Tuesday, October 14th, I said, my voice as soft and steady as a clock's tick. "That was the date of your first book club meeting, wasn't it, Clara? It was held at the Oak Haven. You drank Chardonnay. He had a whiskey, neat. You talked for 3 hours." Clara went white. Julian's smile froze and shattered. I continued, my voice never wavering. I laid out the timeline of their affair, citing dates, locations, even quoting snippets of the messages I had memorized. I recounted their conversations, their secret jokes. I told them about old Father Time. I watched them crumble. I watched the blood drain from Julian's face as he realized the depth of my knowledge. I watched Clara's hands begin to tremble, a fine, frantic tremor. When I was done, a profound silence filled the room, broken only by the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. "You see," I said, walking over to my safe, "I believe in consequences. I believe that every action has a reaction. It's the simple mechanics of the universe." I pulled out the notarized copy of the Deed of Covenant and placed it on the coffee table in front of them. "This," I said, "is a document from 1888. It proves that your swimming pool, Julian, is slated to be built on top of a 19th century burial ground. It is a legally binding covenant. This document, if submitted to the town council tomorrow morning, will not just halt your project, it will destroy it. It will bankrupt you. You will lose everything. Julian stared at the paper as if it were a snake. Clara was openly crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. But here is where things get interesting, I continued. I am a man of reason. I am also a man who, despite everything, still cares for my wife's happiness. I looked at Clara, then back at Julian. So I am going to give you a choice. The two of you. Your great, passionate love story. Here is your chance to prove it's real. Walk out of this house together tonight. Run away. Start your new future. I will not stop you. But the moment you do, a courier will deliver this document to the town clerk. You can have each other, but you will have nothing else. Julian, you will be ruined. A pariah in this town. I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. Or, I said, my voice dropping lower, there is another option. You, Julian, walk out of this house alone. You never see, speak to, or contact my wife again. Your affair ends tonight, forever. In return, this document, I tap the paper, disappears. I will burn it in my fireplace. Your project will be approved tomorrow. You will make your fortune. You will have the future you want, just not with her. I stepped back, my work complete. The mechanism was built. The trap was set. All that was left was for them to choose. I was offering them exactly what they claimed to want. Each other, free from the boring, predictable old man. But I was also showing them the price. And I knew Julian Thorne. He was not a romantic hero. He was a developer. He understood investments, and he knew how to cut his losses. Clara looked at him, her eyes pleading, searching for the passionate man from her messages. But that man was gone. In his place was a cornered businessman doing a cost-benefit analysis. He looked at her, then at the document, then back at her. The calculation was clear in his eyes. He didn't say a word to her. He just stood up, his face a pale, sweaty mask, and looked at me. "It's over," he said, his voice hoarse. "You have my word." And then he turned and walked out of my house, out of my life, and out of Clara's. He chose the money. He always would have. The great passion she thought she had found was just a fleeting, speculative venture, and the market had turned. I had simply forced a correction. Clara sat on the sofa, making a small, wounded sound, like a bird with a broken wing. She was shattered. Not by my rage, but by his rejection. By the undeniable, quantifiable proof that her grand love was worth less to him than a construction project. That was a wound I could never have inflicted, and one that would never, ever heal. I walked over to the fireplace, took the document and tossed it into the flames. I didn't need it anymore. My work was done. Our marriage is not fixed. It is a hollowed-out thing, a beautiful clock with its gears removed. We still live in the same house. We are polite, we are silent, but the rhythm is gone. She is imprisoned now, not by my quiet life, but by the loud, screaming truth of her own choices. I freed her from my boring predictability, only to have her see the ugly, predictable nature of the man she chose over me. Sometimes, late at night, I sit in my workshop, the only light coming from my desk lamp. I listen to the gentle, steady ticking of the clocks all around me. They are all in sync. Perfect mechanical order has been restored, and I think about time and how it really does eventually reveal all things. It is the most patient and the most precise instrument of revenge there is. The story is over, but the silence lingers. What do you think is the truer prison? A quiet life or a loud, devastating truth? Thank you for listening. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and sharing it with someone who appreciates a story that's about more than just a simple betrayal. Your support means the world. Until next time.